All right, it's the day before Election Day. I know we normally publish these on Tuesday, but it wouldn't be very fair for us to do election predictions the day of the election. You might think that's cheating. Besides, we wanted to give you plenty of time to run over to predict it and make some bets because our very own political prognosticator is going to be giving you some specific information that may give you some insight into what is going to happen on Tuesday. So today, if you stick with us, we're going to go through what got us up to this point, some specific predictions on elections coming out, as well as going around the table and talking about our future predictions on whether or not this is a one-off election cycle or some genuine political realignments are coming. All that and more coming up on this episode.
We look forward to hearing from everyone in our Volley chat. I hope you will go there at the link in the description. Join and let us know that you voted tomorrow and also share your predictions with us as well. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Making the Argument.
All right, as always, I am your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates.
Representing James Madison's seat.
Representing James Madison's seat. And that is a distinct honor. That is a distinct honor. With us, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, our resident historian, political prognosticator, the guy that is going to make you rich
the man
unpredicted,
of the hour.
Christian Hines.
We are renaming this Making the Argument with Christian Hines. Making the Prediction with Christian Hines.
Oh. And then, of course,
dangerous.
Our producer of producers, Nick Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
I'm looking forward to hearing what Christian has to say today.
Well, this better be good.
All right, this is, I always love, who knew that I always love the episodes where I get to lead with it? Hey, so Nick and I have actually talked about this quite a lot leading up to this election. It's really funny. It's like every single election cycle, it'll be like a day or two before the election. Nick will either like call me or text me and be like, "Hey, Christian, what do you think's going to happen tomorrow?" But
it's because you're like almost never wrong.
I have been wrong a few times.
Only a few.
I will again, just to kind of lay this up a little bit. We actually have a thing in Virginia called the
VPAP Pundit of the Year.
Pundit of the Year Award, and you actually have to predict several races in it, and it's whoever gets the closest. And like thousands of people participate in this. Christian has won it before.
It was actually 4 years ago today that I won it.
Yeah. So he's
actually counting or anything.
Yeah, he's actually set up various models and whatnot. And again, we'll get into a little bit of that going into this as well, because it's important for people to understand. I think a lot of people got frustrated with some of the polling, and if you're a conservative, especially, you always feel like the polling is kind of skewed against you, and there's some good reason to believe that. But the question is that because every single pollster out there is just, a left-wing ideologue that is trying? Well, no, they still got to get it right. Otherwise, they also lose credibility. It's because, to some degree, polling's been a little bit slow on picking up on new trends.
Yes, and we've talked about some of these trends on this podcast in previous episodes about political realignments. And I do notice that in the last several cycles, really, especially since 2016, polling has underestimated Republicans many times. Now, there's been some talk that maybe some of the polling firms have actually overcorrected this time.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, but let's see, before we actually get into some specific races where I can point to and say, here's what I think some factors are going to be pushing it either in the left or right, let's just remind the audience how we got to the point where we are right now. And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
My gut intuition is that, spoiler alert, I think the GOP is going to have a pretty good night. I don't think it's going to be an overwhelmingly good night, but I think they're going to have a pretty good night tomorrow. And the reason why is not necessarily because of any particular thing that the Republicans did. I think a lot of it has to do with what the Democrats did this year. And Nick, I know that you and I actually talked about this multiple times, actually, in some cases on this show, about how the Democrats fumbled the ball, so to speak.
Well, I feel like all eyes were on the Virginia election in 2021, where Governor Youngkin, Winsome Sears, Jason Mieres, swept it, and then the Republicans took control of the Virginia House of Delegates. And it's interesting because there was a lot of people predicting, okay, what sort of lessons are we going to learn from this? And what's fascinating is I do feel like there are a lot of Republicans that did learn some important lessons from it. And Democrats learned a lot of lessons. They're just all the wrong ones, right? Like one of the biggest issues, and this goes in specifically, I think, with minority voters, is that what we saw in Virginia in 2021 was this idea that Democrats took complete control. So they had the governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor, House, Senate, right? They could do whatever they want. And boy, did they, right? They did just about everything they wanted to do, hardcore, in your face. A lot of it was around education. A lot of it was around stuff with crime and things of that nature. And the end result is that it had negative effects. And it wasn't all because of individual policy positions. It was a combination of individual policy positions, some of them which were deemed, get this, by a federal judge to be racist, right? They had actual policies with admissions processes to certain schools within Virginia where they had written up the new policy in such a way which it caused a federal judge to say you are discriminating against Asian students. Right. And then there was a lot of other things with school shutdowns, et cetera, which these were specific policies. But there was also this general sentiment within the Democratic Party that, this is the way that we should be doing things. And if you don't agree, you're a bigot or a racist. Right. There couldn't be any other explanation. So a parent is upset about their kid's school getting shut down, or a parent's upset about their kid not even being able to get into school, despite the fact that they had the 4.5 GPA and everything else. And a lot of these parents were not right-wing conservative Republicans. A lot of these parents were either fairly politically neutral or even maybe a little bit center-left, but they were frustrated about, well, wait a second, why is this being pushed in my kid's school? Or why can't my kid get into the school? Or why can't my kid go to school? And the result from the left was, oh, you must be a bigot or a racist. And if you think that's a hyperbolic statement, go look at what the Teachers Union in Chicago said when they said that the push to reopen schools is rooted in bigotry, misogyny, and sexism.
Yep.
Right? Go look at what happened when you saw parents showing up to the school board meetings and the National School Board Association, try to coordinate with the Biden Department of Justice, and even potentially the National Guard. That was what they requested. In order to go after and track and monitor these parents that were showing up at school board meetings. And so you had a lot of parents that said, this is ridiculous. This is too much. And they thought that when they went to go speak to their representatives, or when the people they had voted for, when they approached them with this, their response would be, oh, no, we get it. We're trying to address this. You're right. That's a little bit too much. We're pulling this back. That's not what happened. It was, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a bigot, you don't care about equity. And a lot of these parents were like, oh my gosh, it's like what Republicans have been claiming about you is true. You do just sit there and name call everybody that disagrees with you and try to play, these various cards that the Democrats have used successfully now for a long time.
Yeah.
Because again, during the Obama administration, everything was this is the new Democrat coalition.
The coalition of the ascendants.
The coalition of the ascendant, and it was this idea of a minority coalition. And if you disagreed with their policies, it must be because you don't like minorities. And then when minorities found themselves in the crosshairs, the ones suffering from the policies, whether it was really, really weak on crime or whether it was stuff that was going on with schools, and the minority parents came forward and said, hey, I want to see a change to this, they got called racist.
Yeah. What's funny is that the coalition of the ascendant is still intact. It's just shifted to the right in some of these states. Not all of them, as we'll get into. But to add to your point, Nick, and we're going to get into some specific races later on in this podcast when we get into actually making some. I've got a prediction map for both the House and Senate that I'm going to show, and I'll make some specific points for both chambers. And we might even touch on some gubernatorial races because there's some fun ones that are coming up tomorrow. But what I found so fascinating was it wasn't just on the education front that I think Democrats dropped the ball. I think that was the thing that really opened the eyes up for so many people that lived in, especially some of these states that had some really tough lockdowns. Michigan is one in particular where the Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer, she went on the debate stage just a few like a week or two ago and was like, oh, well, the schools were only shut down for 3 months. That was a blatant lie.
Yeah.
She had shut down the schools in that state for over a year.
Yeah.
And parents in that state remember that. They also remember going into grocery stores and having the gardening section taped off with signs saying, under order of the governor, you're legally not allowed to purchase these products at Walmart.
Yeah.
And the draconian shutdowns, I think, really turned not necessarily a majority, but a huge chunk of the population off. But it wasn't just the education and shutdowns. I also think that let's get into some of the stuff that is like dominating the way that the public is looking at this midterm. I really think that the big three issues that the average midterm voter, and there's a lot of variables here, but I think the average midterm voter is caring about inflation, crime, and immigration. Those are the three things. And you can add in the economy, but that's really just another way to describe inflation right now. Or you could add in jobs. That's another way to describe inflation. And what have Democrats done on that front? They not only have it would have been bad enough if they had done nothing on that front. Instead, they actually pushed things that made inflation worse, made crime worse, and made inflation worse. And then they went back to those voters and said, you know what? You shouldn't care about those issues. Nancy Pelosi herself said, we should change the subject when people bring up inflation. It's when people bring up inflation, that's a bad thing. We should change the subject. So Democrats went to the voters and said, here's the issues you should care about this midterm. You should care about abortion, climate change, and
January 6th.
January 6th.
Yeah.
Those are the things that you should care about.
Oh, going into the final days of the election. Going into the final days of the election, Joe Biden is out there talking about, like, if you don't vote for us,
it'll be the end of democracy
is in danger. Like, give me a break. And here's, I will tell you, the part that's a little bit scary to me about this is I was talking to someone the other day who's a friend and who's definitely on the left. And their position was like, well, I'm just scared for our democracy. And you're looking at him going, but are you really?
I actually think a lot of them are.
Okay, I don't buy it, because if you were literally so scared for your democracy, right? You wouldn't be at a party somewhere or going out and hanging out. I mean, you would be out there just every day knocking doors like, oh my gosh, do you realize if Republicans get elected, that's the last election we'll ever have?
But Nick, you've got to remember that these are people who think that the way that you defeat a fascist dictator is by voting early. Like, no, seriously, the same people who said that Trump is a fascist dictator in the same mold as Hitler and Mussolini also thought that, well, the way that we beat him is we just cast paper ballots in a box.
If only the Italians had done that in the 30s,
yeah,
right? We wouldn't have had Mussolini.
Yeah, after Mussolini or Hitler took over, didn't they just know that they could have just voted Hitler out of office? Like, no, so I actually do disagree with you on that. I genuinely think, I don't necessarily think the leaders believe this, but I certainly think the rank and file Democrat voters have been scared to death by the media that they consume and the bubble that they live in, that their number one issue is January 6th. But what they don't understand is that that's not the number one issue for the general public. The general public wants to figure out how they're going to get to work because gas is $4.50 a gallon, or how they're going to be able to feed their family because when they go to the grocery store and they get 3 bags of groceries, it turns out to be $60. Well, those are the issues. Or if they're living in the Rio Grande Valley, they have to worry about drugs coming into the country and a wave of migrants taking up services in their community. And these are communities that are 95% Hispanic. These are problems. Or if they're in Miami-Dade, these are people that fled socialist regimes and now are having to deal with a political party in the United States that whose thought leaders are basically pushing the same policies that existed in places like Venezuela and stuff like that. So I really do think that the reason that we got into this problem is for Democrats. The reason the Democrats got into this problem is because they looked at the issues that voters cared about: inflation, crime, and we haven't even really talked about crime yet. Inflation, crime, and immigration. And they told the American people that not only should they not care about those, they should care about abortion, climate change, and January 6th. And if they don't care about those, they're bigots and they're a threat to democracy.
Well, and so here's another.
Never a good idea. I'll end with this. It is never a good idea to tell the voters that the things that they care about are irrelevant and that they're wrong for caring about those things.
Well, because you brought up, Tina brought up this point earlier, we're also talking about this whole idea of Democrats really doubling down on abortion. They really thought that was going to be their saving grace during this election cycle.
A lot of Republicans thought so too. Like
That's
they
true.
were freaking out when Roe v. Wade was overturned. They were like, why would they do this right before the midterms? And they were really worried about the impact this would have.
Well, we just found out that, like, the latest polling, they even talked about this on The View, right? Sally Hostin or whatever got up there.
Who cares, right?
Well, but she got up there and said, there's a recent poll that's showing that suburban women are swinging 15 points toward Republicans. Now, that doesn't mean 15-point advantage. It means where they were at, with Democrats, now they've swung 15 points to be, voting majority Republican. And she described that as, that's like cockroaches voting for Raid.
I remember that line.
Yeah, I remember that.
And she based on abortion.
There was another candidate also that I saw being interviewed or during a debate, and they were talking about crime. And she goes, Well, I mean, if that's important to you, she kind of did this whole. Well, I don't know why that's so
That was
important.
Hochul.
Oh yeah, that was Kathy Hochul in New York.
And then you've got other Democrats saying, just eat Chef Boyardee to combat the inflation.
Let them eat
or
Chef Boyardee.
Stacey Abrams, abort your baby, and
to deal with
that will help
inflation.
with inflation.
Unbelievable. Again, the just disconnect from the average voter. This is the like when Democrats get wiped out on Tuesday, because I do think they're going to get wiped out, and we're about to get into some specific races here. When they get wiped out on Tuesday, they have nobody to blame but themselves. But they're not going to blame themselves. They're going to be like, it's the voters that are wrong. Yeah. What's that meme from The Simpsons? Wait, am I out of touch? No, it's the children that are wrong. Well, the meme here is going to be, am I out of touch? No, it's the voters that are wrong.
Yeah.
And that's the incredible thing.
Well, okay, let me ask you a question on this, because it used to be that people, I mean, the general political knowledge was win or lose, Republicans tend to be more out of touch, right? The Democrats are the end of touch, the party of the working people, the whole deal. Or even under Obama, it was the idea of this coalition of working people and minorities. And then what we're slowly seeing is that, working people didn't really like a lot of their policies, and now we're seeing that minorities don't like a lot of their policies. But there are some other demographics that have become overwhelmingly left-leaning.
And this is why they're out of touch, because the people that are the Democratic Party's base has become, we say this as like a caricature, but it's become the ivory tower academics. It's become these white, college-educated, suburban, relatively wealthy voters. Mm-hmm. And those are people, Thomas Sowell talks about this all the time. That is the demographic that is the most disconnected from reality. Yeah. The academic class is the most disconnected from reality, in large part because they pay no price for being disconnected. Yeah.
Well, they live in an academic bubble, which they admit, like there's actual polling on this. They admit that especially within certain fields, they deliberately go the extra mile to ensure that only certain people of an ideological bent can get into those positions, those tenured positions, things of that nature. And so they have created an echo chamber within academia, and then their students go into that, and then obviously they've got everywhere.
It becomes a feedback
years.
loop, because then those same students end up becoming the new generation of professors, or the new generation of elitists that live in these core suburbs and cities.
And they really believe that they know more than everybody else. There is this superiority complex. I saw recently, just I think last night, I was trying to pull it back up and I couldn't find it again. But one of the candidates actually said, the American people didn't even know what inflation was or what that word meant till the GOP started harping on it.
That is the message of a loser right there.
And I mean, how many times have we seen other Democrats? I think it was Waters or something that said, the average voter doesn't understand these things. Or maybe that was Pelosi. They don't understand these things. We have to understand them for them, because they're not to the level of thinking, basically, that they are. I mean, it really sounds like...
It was Pelosi that said we need to change the subject, too. And there's one Democrat that is running for U.S. Senate. He's going to lose on Tuesday. And in fact, I might actually use this to start talking about some races.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into our
before you do that,
predictions.
though,
okay.
I just want to highlight really quickly that the way Christian does his predictions, if you know Christian, he tends to be more of a pessimist. And he would argue that he's a realist, but... he tends to be very reserved in his predictions, and for him, it's very important to be right. So a lot of times you can look at all these experts rolling in that, you've got your people on the right and your people on the left that are making their predictions, and they're all experts, right? But you can see the different bias within their prediction, and they're always trying to boost their own side with their prediction and or tamp down the losses or whatever it is. With Christian, I will say you can 100% count on the fact that he does not pad any numbers.
Even if it means we're losing, he will say it.
I've got a story. I don't even know if I'm allowed to share this.
No, don't share. I'm scared now.
I've got a story of Nick's congressional race.
Yeah.
And I created a model before the election to try to predict the outcome, because I wanted to know what was going to happen with our race. I wanted us to win. And I plugged in the numbers, and I was like, oh, we're going to come up short. And it was heartbreaking to do that, right? Mm-hmm. But and I've done this before, like in 2019, when I predicted that Republicans would lose the House and Senate here in Virginia, and that Democrats would have a trifecta for the first time in my life, living here.
Yeah, it was so depressing to hear you. But the thing is You typically are correct.
Yeah,
and so with that knowledge, listening through that lens, so to speak, now hear what Christian has to say about everything.
I think
it's not often when the congressional candidate has to go outside and talk his pollster off the ledge as opposed to the other way.
That's right.
Like we bring this up, and I think Tina brought this up in large part because she wanted to tell the audience that I don't really pull punches. I really do pride myself on. I care about being right, not necessarily telling somebody what they want to hear.
Yeah.
If it's going to rain, I'm going to tell you it's going to rain.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have an umbrella.
But that's why we can trust what you say.
The good news is, I think it's going to be very bright and sunny on Tuesday.
It's morning again.
All right, so where do we
America.
start? Even in Christians' America. All right, so where do we start off with? The Senate, the House? What do we got?
We'll start with the Senate.
Okay.
So, and the reason why I want to begin with the Senate is because I really do think that this is the chamber to watch on election night. For those of you at home that are actually tuning into this podcast because they genuinely want to get an idea, maybe they haven't been paying attention to the polls every single day, or they haven't been paying attention to the entire map every single day. I really want to give the audience some real valuable information that they could use if they want to watch this and understand a little bit more than anybody else in their circle, so to speak. And I really do think that the Senate is the chamber to watch. Out of all the races for governor, House, and Senate, this is the most important one. And the reason why is because I think that Republicans are effectively guaranteed to win the House at this point.
Yeah.
But it's really kind of up in the air as to how the Senate's going to come down. Currently, 538 says the Republicans have about a 54 to 55% chance of winning the Senate.
Wow.
But that's actually really basically almost a toss-up still. So I've actually got 538's map up. This is not my prediction. This is Nate Silver's prediction.
Yeah.
Nate Silver's a guy. He's definitely left of center, but he's relatively well known because he gets it right more often than not.
I think I've seen stuff by 538 before where they really got out of their way to try to be objective. I'm not saying they always pull it off, but I've seen more of an effort from them than I have some
They're
other
biased
places.
in their coverage, but they're not necessarily biased in their predictions.
Yeah.
So don't read their stuff for their articles,
Yeah.
right? But definitely pay attention to their polling stuff. So I've got the map shown up, and at some point I'll actually bring up my prediction map too when we're done with the Senate. Let's start with the 5 races that I don't think are necessarily the 5 most competitive. There's 10 races in total that are competitive.
Okay.
5 that are kind of like second tier, and then 5 that are like top tier. The 5 that are like the second tier races that everybody's kind of going to be looking for a wave in either direction are Washington State, Colorado, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Ohio. Those are the 5 right there. So there's 3 that are held by Republicans and 2 that are held by Democrats currently. Washington State and Colorado are held by Democrat incumbents. Wisconsin, Ohio, and North Carolina are held by Republican incumbents. North Carolina and Ohio are open seats. They're held by Republican incumbents that aren't running for re-election. Washington and Colorado are held by Democrat incumbents, and Wisconsin's held by a Republican incumbent. Now, these are 5 races that Republicans are targeting the 2 blue ones. Democrats are targeting the 3 red ones, but none of them should flip.
Okay.
They should all be held by each party. But when you actually get into the details, let's pull up 538 for Washington. For example, Nate Silver thinks that Democrats have over a 90% chance of winning Washington, but that's his percent chance of winning the seat.
Yeah.
When you look at the polling, it's a lot closer. It's within 10 points in polling. And that's his model. This is his model popular vote right here. So Nate Silver thinks that Washington State is going to basically go to Patty Murray with about 54% of the vote, that she's going to win by about 9 points, for those that aren't watching us, that are listening to us. But when you look at the polling that has taken place, this is where it gets really interesting.
+1, +2.
Every single poll that we've seen really in the last like 2 to 3 weeks or so has been within 10 points.
And she's barely above 50.
It's been closing. That's the incredible thing. If you actually go further back into early October, or if you go even way further back into like September, what you see is that Murray had been leading relatively overwhelmingly until Labor Day, post-Labor Day, when people started paying attention in October. That's when the race started tightening up. She previously, and 538 doesn't have this, but if you actually go even further back, it was not a competitive race really on anybody's radar until people started tuning in October. And what happened was that Well, Murray's advantages started to evaporate. You saw poll after poll, and these are relatively high-rated polls. Insider Advantage, Trafalgar, these are polls that 538 says are kind of like A or B rated polls, which means that they're fairly high-quality polls. What were you going to say, Nick?
No, I was just going to ask you, like, one of the things that you talk a lot about, and if you plan to mention it later, that's fine, but it's the whole 50%.
Yes. In fact, I actually want to bring this up in this race because I currently have Washington State rated myself as a lean Democrat race. Not a likely Democrat, not a safe Democrat, not a tilt Democrat or a toss-up, let alone a Republican flip. I think it's a lean Democrat race, which means that I think that Democrats have, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 to 80% odds of winning. Again, that's not 100%. That means that 30-40% of the time, Republicans will win this seat.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that this is a race that could flip in a landslide. If Republicans actually pull off like a 1994 style landslide, this could flip potentially. I don't think it's
which would be
very
nuts.
likely, but if Washington State goes, I mean, that is the sign of Republicans are getting like 54, 55 seats.
Tina and
I kind of don't think Washington State will go because we lived in Washington during the Dino Rossi recount saga where he won by like 500 something votes or something.
But then they kept recounting until
and
he
then
lost.
They recounted and he won by even more votes, like 1,000 something. And then they recounted again. And I think it was like he started losing a few votes and then they found some votes in King County of all places.
Seattle.
And all of a sudden he lost by several hundred votes.
And it was the fourth recount.
And she goes, the people have spoken. It is time to stop recounting. And so knowing that, like, I feel like in anywhere where Democrats really control a lot of stuff, Republicans,
they're at a disadvantage for sure. Yeah. I don't think it's likely that the Republicans flip this seat. But the reason I wanted to bring up Washington is because I wanted to introduce our audience to a trend line that I've picked up. I poured through election analysis for many, many cycles now. This is not 100% rule, but this is more like 75% of the time you see this happen. When an incumbent consistently polls under 50%, even if they're leading, even if they could lead every single poll.
49 to 45.
But if they're not breaking 50% over and over again, at least like 3 or 4 times, what you see is they're more likely than not going to lose.
Okay.
Especially if they're on the defense. And what I mean by that is if they're in a cycle where the winds is pushing against them, it's a midterm, the exact same sort of thing that Patty Murray's having to deal with. She's the Democrat incumbent, right? You've got Democrat control over Congress and the presidency. So it is a midterm cycle that is not going to be going well for Democrats. When those things align and you're an incumbent and you're consistently polling under 50%, there's a greater than 50% chance that you're going to lose.
Okay, so North Carolina, Ohio, Wisconsin, they're probably staying Republican at this point.
That is true. So to wrap up Washington, I do think that Democrats are favored, but not overwhelmingly.
Okay. And the bottom line is and this is another important part for people to understand on this, all right? Because every once in a while they'll say like, hey, why are we even talking about Washington State? When I start to see the Democratic Party throwing money into states that they should not have to do
where
it.
They should be safe.
Same thing with Republicans. That's bad because every dollar that's being spent there is not being spent in one of these more competitive races where they absolutely need him. Mm-hmm. But so the idea that Patty Murray, who's been there forever,
is even in danger
in Washington State, a state which is largely dominated by Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia. That's pretty fascinating.
To plow through this, Colorado, I think, is actually likely Democrat. Okay. And the reason why is because Bennett has been breaking that 50% margin in many of the recent polls. Mm-hmm. It's still relatively tight, but that is a sign. Plus, Colorado's trend to the left that we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years. Denver is in many ways kind of a Seattle in the middle of the desert, right? Yeah. So I do think that Colorado is a likely Democrat. Again, if Colorado flips, again, another sign of a red wave. I don't think it's terribly likely, though, especially because the state's demographics plus the fact that Bennett has been breaking 50%. Wisconsin is interesting. 538 actually at one point, back in the late summer, early fall, back in late August into mid-September, Democrats were really closing the gap there. 538 at one point thought that Wisconsin was basically a pure toss-up. And now what you've seen is basically Ron Johnson, the Republican incumbent, has just broken out and it's become uncompetitive at this point. I think that Wisconsin is pretty likely going to end up falling in the Republican column. And you're seeing this in the polling, right, where Johnson has been breaking 50%. Plus, he's got the wind at his back because it is a midterm election where Republicans are favored to do well because that is the traditional pattern that we've seen in midterm elections.
Sure.
And I bring this up because, and we didn't talk about this earlier in the episode. Midterm elections traditionally do well for the party out of power. The party that does not control the White House traditionally does well in midterms. There's been 2 exceptions to that rule in any of our lifetimes, and that was 2002 and 1998. And they were very, very extraneous circumstances. 2002 was post 9/11, and the country was basically rallying behind the party in power, which was the Republicans. 1998, it was the aftermath of the Bill Clinton trial. The general public, even though they didn't really like Clinton's behavior, they thought that Republicans had overreached on that, and Republicans had basically overpromised and underdelivered. And so they didn't lose control over Congress, but they didn't make gains. And so those are the only 2 exceptions to that rule. Every other midterm election, going back to like the 50s, has been the party out of power. Even if they don't flip a chamber, they pick up seats.
All right, so what state? So those are the 5 that are kind of second tier.
I want to end with, in terms of the second tier races, North Carolina is another example where Republicans are favored because it's a state that voted for Trump.
Yeah.
There's not an incumbent that has any sort, like the previous incumbent actually had some really bad track record related to like selling stocks right when COVID hit and stuff like that. Luckily, he's leaving, and so Republicans they're not being weighed down by that. And the polling there is pretty clear that Republicans are favored to win. I want to end with Ohio and for the second tier races that Republicans and Democrats are targeting, but probably not likely going to flip. And the reason why is because there's one Democrat, and I was hinting at this earlier in segment 1. There's one Democrat out of everybody that's running in the U.S. Senate this year that has actually run a good campaign, and his name is Tim Ryan. He's the Democrat that's running for U.S. Senate in Ohio. And Tim Ryan's probably going to lose. Yeah. Very likely going to lose. I've got Ohio as a likely Republican pickup. Likely Republican hold. And you're seeing this in the polling where J.D. Vance has been leading pretty handily in most of the polling. Ohio has zoomed to the right in large part because it's a largely working class state. There's a lot of blue-collar voters that have been basically treated like garbage by the Democrats and abandoned, and they've in turn abandoned the Democrats. Ohio used to be it was like the swing state in the country, and it's just not anymore. It's shifted very hard to the right over the last few years. So Ryan is probably going to lose, but the reason I want to bring him up is because he's actually run ads that have said things like, I know your family's hurting from inflation, and I'm going to work to fight against it. I know that you care about the price of groceries. I know you care about rising crime in your cities.
He was just on the news trashing the DNC.
And again, he's going to lose. And I wouldn't vote for him because I disagree with him heavily on a lot of these policies. But from a messaging standpoint, he's literally one of the only Democrats that has at least attempted to talk about issues that voters actually care about rather than tell those voters you're wrong and you're a bigot because you care about this, this, and this. He hasn't done that. His campaign, to their credit, actually looked at the polling and said, oh, well, we wish we could talk about January 6th and abortion and climate change, but that's not what the voters actually care about in my state. The voters actually care about rising crime and high gas prices and high inflation. Maybe we should actually talk about those things. The fact that Ohio is even competitive this cycle is a testament to the fact that he's at least trying to talk about the issues that voters actually care about. And so I bring this up because this has some big implications in other states where Democrats are not doing this. So that's the reason I wanted to bring up Ohio. Not because I actually think it's going to flip. I do think J.D. Vance is going to win. I've got it as a likely Republican pickup. But the reason is because the reason it's even competitive is because the Democrat there is actually doing what, you should be doing when you're running for office. So those are the 5 races that are kind of like the second tier ones that parties are contesting but shouldn't flip unless something crazy happens. So now we get into the fun ones. The 5 most competitive Senate races in the country. These are really the 5 states that you need to be watching on election night because this is going to determine everything. In large part because these races also, most of them, but not all of them, also have very competitive gubernatorial elections as well. And many of them have very competitive elections for the House of Representatives too. These 5 are Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. Republicans currently only hold one of these 5 seats, and they hold Pennsylvania. And the incumbent Republican is vacating the seat, so it's an open seat.
Yeah, that's the Oz Fetterman.
That's the Oz Fetterman one. The other 4 are held by Democrat incumbents, all 4 of them. And Republicans, if they end up flipping one of them, they have to hold Pennsylvania or they have to flip 2, right? But if they hold Pennsylvania and they flip one of them, they get control of this of the chamber. If they lose Pennsylvania, then they need to flip 2 other ones out of the remaining 4. But if they hold Pennsylvania, they just need to flip 1 and they end up having control of the chamber. But these are the 5 states that will end up determining control of the U.S. Senate. And these are probably the 5 most important states in the entire country on election night that most eyes are going to be fixed on.
So tell us about Pennsylvania then.
You want to start with Pennsylvania?
That's important. Well, because that's what everything's hinging on.
So Pennsylvania is a really interesting one here. If you actually pull up 538, they still think that Fetterman is favored to win. I disagree. I actually think that Oz is going to win, which I could not imagine saying that even 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I thought that Pennsylvania was basically as good as gone. But
So is that all? I mean, do you think that's primarily because of the debate performance?
no, I think that it was moving in that direction. The debate performance simply ramped it up to the point that I actually felt comfortable saying that it's a tilt Republican race.
Okay, can you tell us why?
So what had happened is that Republicans nominated Oz. They were very, very divided over that.
Yeah.
And Democrats were relatively united around Fetterman. But what they noticed is that as the campaign kept going on, Fetterman's campaign was basically a Twitter, Instagram campaign where they were just posting memes and just ratioing and trolling Oz over and over again. It was an extremely online campaign. But Fetterman's campaign, despite the fact that Fetterman himself should have fit the demographics of Pennsylvania, he came from a working class family. He himself was had a blue collar background before he got involved into politics. He should have been able to connect well with the state's demographics, but his campaign never really focused on those issues. His campaign just focused on whatever the Zoomer millennial crowd that were running it within the Democratic Party's campaign apparatus wanted to talk about. And they wanted to talk about January 6th, abortion, and climate change. And Oz actually ran a relatively disciplined campaign. He himself was not necessarily a perfect politician. He was not a inherent politician. He kind of had to learn how to do this. But his campaign was relatively disciplined. And his campaign was like, we are going to focus on crime and inflation. Those are the 2 things. Third one you could argue is energy because Pennsylvania has a lot of fracking potential. But Oz's campaign kept hammering away at the crime issue, in large part because crime has just absolutely spiraled out of control in Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs. Yeah. In large part because there's a George Soros-backed DA in Philadelphia that has just chosen, you know what, it's not a crime if we don't prosecute it.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, that is not a really good strategy to keep violent crime under control.
I do find it funny that we have people that seem to think that, well, no, crime has gone down. Okay, you're right. If you don't arrest or prosecute people for victimizing other people, theoretically, your crime stats might have gone down, but your victims go up. Like, do you see how that works?
Yeah. So the crime thing really became a big issue in Philadelphia. And this wasn't just affecting like rich white liberals in the suburbs. This was really affecting Black and Hispanics in Philadelphia. And what you started seeing is it wasn't just affecting them, it was also affecting these swing suburban voters, not necessarily the white elite liberals, but the traditional suburban swing voters out in like Chester County, Bucks County, Berks, stuff like that, in the Philadelphia collar counties, Delaware County. And so what happened is that Fetterman's campaign kind of like fell off the rails, really starting in like the beginning of October. And Oz's campaign was disciplined and kept focused on the issues that actually mattered in Pennsylvania. And I don't say this as a partisan Republican. I'm just saying this as an analyst. And then the debate happened. And the debate really exposed, it was already moving in a competitive direction. It had been, many people thought that it was basically going to be a Democrat pickup. But then the debate, it was starting to tighten from that point. And it was getting into it wasn't a guaranteed Democrat pickup anymore, but they were still favored, right?
Yeah.
And then the debate happened. And we've talked about this on this podcast.
Yeah, even Cuomo was like,
that debate was a complete disaster. And from that point onwards, it basically became a toss-up.
All right, so Oz beats Fetterman.
I think that Oz does beat Fetterman.
Okay, and that's a pickup.
And
That's a hold. Sorry.
Which means we only need to pick up one more. That's what you're saying.
Well,
I want to talk about Nevada now.
Yeah.
Nevada is a state that Democrats have just won consistently since 2008, right? Obama won it in 2008.
Yeah.
He won it again in 2012. Hillary Clinton won it in 2016. Joe Biden won it in 2020. In 2018, the last Republican senator in 2016, the last Republican senator in Nevada lost. In 2018, Republicans came up short again. So Nevada is just like.
It kills
Nevada.
me every time he says Nevada.
I'm not from there.
We're going to have people from Nevada who are
I
going
apologize.
to say you are not saying
I
this
love
correctly.
the Silver State, but I've never been there. But long story short, Republicans have just it's almost like Virginia in the sense that we just kept losing.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the trend line. The state had been, that entire time that Republicans kept losing, the state had been getting redder and redder and redder in relation to the entire country. In 2008, Nevada was it was something like 6 points to the left of the country, 5 or 6 points to the left of the country. And by the time 2020 came around, even though Republicans came up short, Nevada actually voted to the right of the rest of the country, despite the fact that Trump lost it. It has been a trend line towards the right. And the reason why is because Clark County is not nearly as Democrat leaning as people believe that it is. In fact, I will prove it to you. Here is the vote trend in Clark County, Nevada. I've got Wikipedia's article pulled up. This is the presidential vote results here. Clark County is where Las Vegas is. This is like the overwhelming majority of the people who live in the state live there. It's very urban and suburban state. Large number of minority population, large black population, large Hispanic population. It has all the makings, all the hallmarks of a strong Democrat, 60, 70% Democrat. And yet Joe Biden couldn't get 54% of the vote in Clark County.
Wow.
And that is down from 2008 when Barack Obama got almost 60% in Clark County. Clark County is an urban county, home of Las Vegas, over 1 million residents. And yet it has been getting redder since 2008, not bluer, which is just completely contrary to what Democrats were hoping for with the whole coalition of the ascendant. So Nevada has been getting more and more competitive. And I really do think this is going to be the cycle where it finally flips.
So you think all the other areas that are a lot redder than Clark County
rural,
are going to be able to get enough oomph to get over the line?
Yes. The Democrats have a firewall of mail-in ballots that they've got, but it's a lot weaker than it was in 2018. In 2018, it was like 45,000 advantage, and right now it's like 35,000 or something like that. So And the polling has shown this, and in large part, this goes back into the 50% rule. Cortez Masto, who is the Democrat incumbent senator, she has not broken 50% in a single poll conducted, basically going back to like the late summer. In fact, Adam Laxalt, who's the Republican challenger, former attorney general in Nevada, he's been leading in most of the polling. Now, people can say, oh, well, Harry Reid also fell behind in a lot of polling in 2010, and he came out on top because he had that union machine where the culinary union in Clark County came out for him. Yeah. And Harry Reid was the Democrat majority leader at the time, right? And he was supposedly going to lose in 2010, but he won. And so we're going to see the exact same thing here. I don't think so, because the demographic shift from 2010 to today is so much more favorable to Republicans in this state than it was 12 years ago. Because a lot of those Hispanic voters that voted for Harry Reid in 2010, they're not going to be voting for Cortez Masto this time around. So I've got Nevada as a Republican flip. And I think that it's really going to be a state that will potentially prove the thesis that Republicans are making gains with Hispanic voters.
Okay, so at that point, we flip the Senate. If
we hold Pennsylvania and we flip Nevada, we flip the Senate. But
okay, now tell us about the
I
next
don't think
one.
it's going to end there. I think Republicans are going to get more than 51 seats.
There's more.
There's more.
All right.
Arizona's one where I have the biggest difference between me and Nate Silver. Nate Silver thinks that Mark Kelly has a basically 2-to-1 advantage in terms of likelihood to win, and I actually think that he loses. And here's the reason why.
Carrie Lake.
Couple reasons. Carrie Lake is doing phenomenal at the top of the ticket. She's run probably, if Tim Ryan has run the best campaign of any Democrat, Carrie Lake has run the best campaign of any Republican this cycle.
Let me just say one thing on that. Like, if you were to ask me, one of the things I look at with Republican candidates is how well do you handle the press? Because the press are almost universally trying to trip you up, make you feel stupid, make you look like an idiot, say something stupid. And the press in Arizona, really press across the country, did as good a job as I have ever seen in demonizing a primary candidate and making it look like she was just this bumbling moron. And then when she got the nomination and all of a sudden she was the one standing in front of the camera talking, you're like, how is the press even talking about her? Like, she has done the best job of any Republican candidate I have seen.
Well, she's former
in
press.
handling the press. And she's even said that. Yeah.
She's former press. And if we know anything about Democrats is that when you are supposed to be in the category they want you in because you're part of their little cabal and you break out of that and stop speaking their talking points, you are worse than the enemy.
I don't think it's just Carrie Lake, though, that's going to be the reason that Republicans flip the Senate race in Arizona. I also think that a couple reasons. Demographics as well. Hispanics are shifting to the right. And you actually saw this in 2020 where suburban Phoenix shifted hard to the left, but downtown Phoenix, where most of the Hispanics lived, actually shifted to the right. Yeah.
That's that donut effect you mentioned.
That's the donut theory that we've brought up before on this podcast. That combined with the fact that suburbs do look like they're going to have a revision to the mean, where suburbs that have been trending to the left over the last few cycles are going to shift to the right again. Maybe not back to where they were 10 years ago, but they're going to shift to the right again. That combined with this trend line with Hispanics getting more conservative means that Mark Kelly's in serious danger, I think. And I think the polls are underestimating him in large part because I don't think the polling firms have necessarily corrected for the fact that Hispanics are getting more conservative right now.
Well, and to your point, Kelly doesn't get over 50.
Kelly has not broken 50% in a single poll going all the way back into...
Well, it looks like there was one. Yeah, the New York Times, Siena College, back in October.
No, that was 49.
No, there's a...
51.
51
Go down
down.
one. Go down one.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
So one poll.
Yeah.
There's one... Here's the problem, though. Look at the trend line, though. It's getting more competitive. Now, here's the thing. Blake Masters hasn't led in a single poll, which is why people are saying, oh, well, he's going to lose. But I really do think that the fundamentals of this state, which did shift to the left, in large part because these white suburbanites around Phoenix shifted to the left. But a lot of those people now are worried about inflation and crime. And
they're a border state, too. And it was
immigration as well. This is the third thing. So Carrie Lake, I think the stakes demographics, but I also think the nature of the campaign. Mark Kelly, and that gets into the polling as well, right? So I think the polling is not actually as favorable to Kelly as people think because he's the incumbent and he's really struggling to get to that 50% mark. But when you actually looked at the debates, Kelly was really on the defensive on immigration. When you saw the debates between him and Blake Masters, he was like criticizing Joe Biden, but very softly because he had to tread a very fine line. And I don't think he managed to break that bar of what he needed to do in order to cement himself as a big enough outsider. He tried to say, like, I'm an outsider. I'm going to stand up to Joe Biden. And the dude has been a rubber. He's not Kristen Sinema.
Yeah.
He has just been a blatant rubber stamp for Chuck Schumer in the Democratic Senate. So I think Arizona is a tilt Republican. I think it's actually less likely to flip than Nevada. But I do actually think that Mark Kelly loses. And now we get to Georgia.
So that means hold Pennsylvania, pick up 2 seats.
Now we're at 52.
So now we're at 52.
Okay.
And
here comes 53.
There's more.
There's still more. Here comes 53. Georgia. This has been... If Pennsylvania has been the nightmare for Democrats, Georgia has been the nightmare for Republicans.
Yes, it has.
We've just had problem after problem after problem in Georgia. But there's a couple things. In fact, I'm actually, of all the states that I am currently predicting as either Republican holds or flips, I am least confident of Georgia. I currently have Georgia rated as a tilt Republican, but I am the least confident of that, of any single. I'm more confident Republicans will flip Arizona, which the polling is not in our favor, than in Georgia, where the polling is really mixed and it's kind of all over the place.
Well, they're also going to head for a runoff. And so that is a whole other mix.
It should. So my initial prediction currently is Georgia will go to a runoff because I don't think anybody will get 50%. If somebody does get 50%, I think it's more likely going to be Herschel Walker because of a red wave environment.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things going against us in Georgia, not just the quality of the candidates and the campaigns that they've run, but I also think that the whole donut theory is working really hard against us in Georgia right now. Georgia is a state that has been dominated geographically by one urban area, and that's Metro Atlanta. And what you see is that in a lot of these states where there's one metro area that just overwhelms the rest of the state, those states tend to be more Democratic leaning. And it just so happened that it took long enough for Georgia to actually flip into the blue column. But I remember in the summer and spring of 2020 predicting that Georgia would flip blue before any pollster. I've even got the Facebook post to go back and prove it. Before any pollster and any pundit thought that Georgia was even on the competitive landscape.
Yeah.
Before the Joe Biden campaign targeted Georgia. I was out there saying Georgia's going to flip blue. Georgia's moving away from Republicans from a demographic standpoint. Suburban Atlanta's shifting very hard to the left. Atlanta's ballooning like crazy. And again, when you look at states like Minnesota or New York State or Washington State, states that have one urban area that is just the core of the state.
Yeah.
In Minnesota, it's Minneapolis. In New York State, it's New York City. In
Illinois,
Washington State, it's
Chicago.
Seattle. Those are states that tend to be more Democratic leaning. It's states when there's multiple cities and no single city overwhelms the rest. Texas, you've got Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. And Pennsylvania, you've got Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. When you have multiple cities, Ohio, you've got 3, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus. Those are states that are more Republican leaning or competitive. And so Georgia, I really do think that the nature of the state itself is very difficult for Republicans right now, and it's shifting away from us.
So let me ask you that. Okay, so you say that in the Senate, but and I know we're not going to spend a lot of time on gubernatorial races, but let's talk about the gubernatorial race because obviously we think Kari Lake is helping out, Masters in Arizona. Is the gubernatorial race helping out the Senate candidates at all in Georgia, and if not, why?
Yes. Brian Kemp is the incumbent, and he's very favored to win.
Yeah.
538 gives him...
Whoa. Did you say Brian Kemp is the incumbent?
Oh, I'm sorry. Stacey Abrams.
Racist.
Stacey Abrams, of all the incumbent Democrats this year, Stacey Abrams is the most likely to lose.
Okay. All righty.
Well, let's keep in mind that Stacey Abrams thinks that if the gas prices are hurting you and inflation is hurting you, the best thing to do is abort your babies.
Yeah. So can I give an award for worst campaigns of the year?
Yes.
So worst campaign of the year for U.S. Senate goes to John Fetterman.
Yeah, has to.
No question
He's
about it.
worked so hard on that.
He's worked very hard for that. He's earned that. Worst campaign on the gubernatorial side goes to Stacey Abrams.
Wow, and that was a competitive...
At the beginning it was.
That was no. I mean, it was competitive for worst Democrat campaign because between Whitmer and Hochul, and it's like, so many of them were like, I can say something dumb. No, I can say something dumb. But Stacey Abrams really just...
So to give you an idea of how bad things are going for Stacey Abrams, the polling right now shows that she's going to lose by like 5+ points.
Yeah.
And this is a state that she almost won in 2018.
Yeah, 40,000
And in a
votes.
state, as I said earlier, that is zooming to the left right now.
Yeah.
The fundamentals of Georgia, if this weren't a midterm election where Republicans are favored, I would say that Warnock, the Democrat incumbent senator, would be favored to win. But it's because of two things. It's because of the fundamentals of the nationwide circumstances of this race, not the fundamentals of the state of Georgia, but the fundamentals of the midterm election itself. So the whole midterm effect of it potentially being a red wave, that's working against Democrats in Georgia. And it's the gubernatorial race where Brian Kemp could end up dragging Herschel Walker over the line and kind of give him the win in large part because he's about to clobber Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
And
Well, she's already setting it up and saying that it's voter suppression laws and things like that, but the numbers are completely not in her
Yeah.
favor
It's
to
gonna be
make that
so-
claim.
most early voting in
voter
history.
suppression laws. So let's get this straight. If Warnock wins but you lose,
Yeah.
voter suppression?
Yeah, she's saying
we only rigged the ballots for one of the two races. What?
because they're not letting us bring water and food to
That's
people
not even
in line.
true, by the
That's not
way.
even true.
That's not even
It's
true.
not even
It's
true.
a lie. But Stacey Abrams has run the worst campaign of any Democrat I've seen on the gubernatorial side. She doesn't know how to communicate with anybody.
Yeah.
To give you an idea, we're looking at a scenario in Georgia, southern state, with a black female running for the Democratic side and a black male running on the Democratic side for U.S. Senate, where black men very well might end up going about 20 to 25% for Herschel Walker and Brian Kemp.
Yeah.
Which is unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of. And the reason why is because Stacey Abrams, this is going to sound very controversial, but the data and the polling and the news articles on this back this up. This is stuff from the left.
Yeah, this is not your opinion. This is
not
you
my
talking
opinion.
about their research. Yeah.
Stacey Abrams does not know how to communicate to black men in Georgia.
Just so we're clear, that's what the left is saying.
For those that disagree or take offense with that, don't blame me.
Yeah.
I'm just the messenger. I can show you news articles from left-wing outlets saying she has a problem with black men, getting them to the polls and getting them to vote for her. They're not excited by her at all. And in large, it's not surprising because she doesn't know how to communicate to, it's not just black men, she doesn't know how to communicate to anyone.
Yeah.
Won't she just blame the patriarchy for that?
Yeah, she's also been living in this bubble for the last few years on everybody in the press fawning over, and everybody like the Democratic Republican the Democrat Governors Association treating her as like an honorary member, and like she was
the real governor.
Yeah, and so they kept doing this where she was living in this constant echo chamber, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, she had to go back and actually make an argument for her positions and convince people to vote for her.
It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. There's an element of Democrats that are running for office right now, and a lot of them are going to lose on Tuesday, that they're just completely disconnected from reality at this point. They literally do not know how to communicate to the average voter at all. They go up to the average voter and they say, you haven't been following the January 6th trials? You must be a right-wing extremist. Yeah. It'll be some Hispanic first or second generation immigrant that wants to start a business, and they're upset about the fact that inflation's 10%.
Yeah.
And so like, long story short, the two reasons that I have Georgia currently as a tilt Republican race on the Senate side is because of the fundamentals of the midterm effect and the fact that Stacey Abrams is about to get absolutely blown out of the water in Georgia on the gubernatorial side. And split ticket voting has really declined over the last 20 years. That's not to say it doesn't exist. But it's a weaker thesis, though.
So we're running up on an hour. So give us the last Senate one, and then we got to do a couple of the things.
last one is New Hampshire. New Hampshire was a race that I currently have as tilt Democrat.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's gotten competitive, it's like Washington, except it's more competitive. The fact that it's gotten competitive is really amazing. Bolduc has, he's the Republican nominee. He's like, I believe he's a former general.
Yeah, former general, former SF guy.
He has
special ops guy.
Run a very disciplined campaign. He did the exact same thing that we've seen in some of these other states. He just looked at the polling and said, okay, we're going to talk about inflation.
So why'd the Republican Party abandon him?
Because he said that he wasn't going to vote for Mitch McConnell for Senate Majority Leader.
See, I tell you what, that should be a talking point for him, but it's amazing to me that it's like, oh, you're not going to vote for me as the leader? Well, then I'm going to pull your stuff.
We're not going to run ads for you. Yeah.
Like, so you'd rather live in a scenario where you can't be the leader because you can't control the Senate, rather than help somebody that could put you in a position to actually control the Senate and potentially still win that election.
And New Hampshire is a very elastic state. And by that, I mean there's a lot of swing voters in New Hampshire. Yeah. This is a state that with the right messaging and advertising and with enough money put behind it, you can win. Yeah. If he loses, it's not going to be because he did anything wrong. It's going to be because Republican leadership abandoned him on purpose. Yeah. If they had invested the same resources into his race that they did in, say, Ohio or Nevada or Georgia or Pennsylvania, I would have this rated as a tilt Republican race.
I really hope he wins, mainly to just, I mean, that just infuriates me, because I can't tell you how many times like we get this drumbeat messaging from leadership where it's like, oh, you've got to do this because we're all one team, and look, we can't do anything if we don't have the majority.
Yeah.
And then you have a situation like this where it's like, okay, you got a really good chance of taking the majority, but guess what, leadership, you might have to pick somebody that isn't going to lick your boots every time you want him to. It's like, oh, we'd rather lose.
So here's the map.
Forget you then.
Here's the map that I've got. Oh, look, here's the Yesli Vega ad. Here's the map that I've got. This is from 270 to win. This is the U.S. Senate. So I've got it color-coded for those that are watching us on YouTube.
Yeah.
This is the map. So my current predictions are ultimately a chamber that is going to, I think it'll be 53-47.
All right,
and that is a lot more optimistic than what
please.
Nate Silver has. Nate Silver has 51-49.
Yeah.
And I again, a lot of these are really close. Three of them are tilt Republican.
So look, we're coming up on an hour, and this was the main chamber that you wanted to talk about. So there you go. You heard the prediction, 53-47. Republicans take it, with the big ones being Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Here's my question. Again, we already kind of agree that, I mean, everyone agrees that, yeah, Republicans are most likely going to take the House. It's just a question is it by 15 seats or is it by 40? Do they pick up 15? Do they pick up 40? Whatever. Let's talk about this. Let's kind of jump to, what do you consider to be indicator races? So, like, what are things either for governor, for House, for Senate?
Yeah.
What are races that if you're watching on election day and this happens, that's a great indication that.
So we've already talked about the Senate. I'll talk on that, on the House and the gubernatorial side, and I want to end actually on some crazy things that are happening in Florida right now.
Oh my gosh!
Because it is incredible. Republicans are about to turn Florida into a state that's like as red as like Ohio.
And this is like right after like a major hurricane and all kinds of
to give you an idea, Ron DeSantis is very well might end up getting like a 10-point win in Florida. And not only that, the early vote data that has been coming out of Miami-Dade County, 2 million people, urban, majority minority, literally voted for Hillary Clinton 2-1, voted for Barack Obama about 2-1, traditionally hardcore Democrat stronghold. Here's a prediction for you. Ron DeSantis will win Miami-Dade County.
That is, all right, you heard that.
That is a prediction. No Republican in 20 years has won Miami-Dade County.
And what do you think the reason is for that?
I think it's because a couple things. DeSantis is an extremely strong candidate, and I think there's
Chris is a horrible candidate.
Fundamental hardcore realignment that is taking place in Florida politics, where Hispanic voters in South Florida are just deserting the Democrats in droves.
Yeah.
And it's not just them. You're seeing an influx of conservative retirees moving down to the state as well. I mean, to give you an idea of how bad it is for the Democrats in Florida, if DeSantis gets the margin that I think he's going to get statewide, if he gets 54 or 55% statewide, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility, I think on the low end he'll get 52 or 53. But if he gets 54 or 55, there's a chance, I don't think it's likely, but there's a chance, an outside chance, that he actually flips Palm Beach County.
Wow.
Palm Beach County was so Democrat. That was the county where the 2000 election,
the hanging
crisis
chads.
had. Where Al Gore, to give you an idea, Al Gore won that county 2-1.
Yeah.
And I think there's an outside chance that Palm Beach actually.
All right, so that's
when
so watching Miami-Dade and watching what's going on, that's an indicator.
Yeah.
Maybe not for the entire country, but it's indicative
for
of
a larger realignment shift that could be leading into 2024, and that'll be another conversation for another day. Now, to give you an idea with the House, what we've currently got right now is. Right now, you've got 220 Democrats and 112 Republicans.
212 Republicans.
Sorry, I meant to say 212 Republicans. Here's what my current map is, and I've intentionally got our district, Virginia 7th, blocked out because I don't want to make a prediction for our race. That's the one race I won't make a prediction on, but here's what I've got right now. I think Republicans are going to get about 230.
Okay.
Now, to give you an idea, nationwide, if Republicans get more than 230 seats, if they pick up more than 230 seats, that is an absolute tsunami.
Yeah.
If they get less than 230 seats, it's still a wave, as long as it's more than, like, say, 220. So 220 to 230 seats, I would say, is a GOP wave. 230 plus is like an absolute wipeout.
Yeah.
And Republicans are basically guaranteed to flip the entire chamber. But to give you an idea for some specific races that are going to be extremely competitive, you're looking at Patrick Maloney in New York 17th. He's a member of Democratic leadership, and he's in serious trouble right now. Alan Fung in Rhode Island might actually end up flipping that, and Republicans haven't controlled a congressional seat in Rhode Island in decades. So those are some New England Northeast ones. You're also looking at some races in Pennsylvania, to give you an idea. A friend of ours, Joe, is actually working on a campaign in Pennsylvania here in the 8th District against Matt Cartwright. This is a seat that Trump narrowly won in 2020. Cartwright is a strong incumbent, though. So this is considered a toss-up, pure toss-up by a lot of people. If Pennsylvania's 8th, as well as the 7th, down in the Lehigh Valley, if either of those flip, those are both held by Democrat incumbents. If either of those flip, that's a sign of a landslide.
Yeah.
Here in Virginia, the 7th is another one that people need to look out for. I would also point to people in the Midwest, to Ohio's 9th District with Marcy Kaptur. She's been in office for a very long time, like 40 years, and she's in a district that basically was 50-50 in 2020. After redistricting, it got redder. She's a very strong incumbent, member of House leadership. but very, very vulnerable. That's a district that could flip as well to the Republicans. And then there's 2 in Michigan as well. There's the 8th and the 7th in Michigan. The 7th has a Democrat incumbent that is very, very similar to Abigail Spanberger. Alyssa Slotkin has a background as well in some of the same similar areas as Spanberger did. And I think in either intelligence or FBI work or something like that. She's basically a Spanberger clone.
Yeah.
And she's in a district that barely voted for Joe Biden. So that's another seat. That in the 8th, which is an old working class seat in some of these old, like heart of the Rust Belt in Michigan is shifting hard to the right, but hasn't actually flipped yet. So those are 2 that in the Midwest, in addition to that 3rd one in Ohio, that Republicans need to look out for. In the Southwest, what you want to look for in the Rio Grande Valley is the 34th and the 15th districts in Texas. These are 2 districts on the Rio Grande Valley. These are overwhelmingly Hispanic districts, like 95% Hispanic. And I think that the 34th has 2 incumbents, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican in it, so it's not really held by either party right now. That is a seat that Republicans should lose because it's got like Brownsville and like literally on the river.
Yeah.
Historically, overwhelmingly Democrat. The fact that it's even competitive shows you the shift that you're seeing with Hispanics. If Republicans flip that is another sign of a big Hispanic flip. And as well as the 15th. And on the outside, you could say the 28th. I don't think Republicans flip it, but if they do, those 3 Rio Grande seats, if they flip 2 of those 3, let alone all 3 of them, that is a huge, huge tectonic fundamental shift in our politics. And then I'll close on the West Coast. There's a couple of seats in Nevada and California and Oregon that people should look out for. So the 3 Las Vegas area districts. So you're looking at the 4th, the 3rd, and the 1st in Nevada. Democrats control all 3 of them, but they tried to gerrymander to defend all 3 of them. And ironically enough, they might actually draw what's called a dummy mander, and they might accidentally lose all 3 of them. I don't think that's likely. I think they'll win at least 1, if not 2 of them. But if any of those flip, that's a sign that Republicans are probably going to end up winning at least one of either the gubernatorial or Senate elections in Nevada. And then finally in California, there's 2 Republican-held seats that are very competitive right now. There's California's 22nd district. Vallado has been in and out of office multiple times. He's won and lost multiple times. He's a strong incumbent that has a lot of ties to the Hispanic community in the Central Valley, but it's an overwhelmingly Joe Biden district. He has no business holding the district. It's kind of a miracle that he's holding it to begin with. And the same thing with Garcia and Los Angeles County. Kind of a miracle that he's even holding it to begin with. If these are 2 seats that, like of all the seats that were Republican held, these are ones that should flip. But if we hold them, again, that's another sign that's indicative of a wave. And then finally, I will end with the new district in Oregon, the 5th district. Technically, the new district is actually the 6th. They picked up a new district, but they redrew all the lines, and so the 5th is not really the new district on paper, but it is in reality. The 5th district's previous incumbent was a more moderate Democrat that was ousted by a hardcore left-wing socialist, and it's a district that drew all the way up into Portland.
Yeah.
It voted for Biden narrowly because it includes a lot of conservative rurals. It was gerrymandered by Democrats to be a Democrat pickup, but I think it flips. The Democrats have really dropped the ball there. So those are the races that I would say to look out for on election night in terms of the House, of what they want to be paying attention to. We've talked about some of the gubernatorial ones: Georgia to look out for, Nevada to look out for, Arizona.
Michigan.
The big ones in the Midwest are Michigan and Wisconsin that have Democrat incumbents. I think Wisconsin flips to the Republicans. I don't know if Michigan does at this point. And then if you want to get really gutsy, New York, which I don't think is going to flip, but I think it's going to be so much closer than any race we've seen in the last 20 years in New York. And then finally, my favorite, Florida, which at this point, the only thing that's up for doubt in Florida is what is the margin of the landslide going to be?
All right, well, there you have it. We're going to have a 53-47 Senate. We're going to have a 230-204 House favoring the Republicans on both sides. Republican governor candidates are probably going to have a better than average night. Listen, we would like to get it. I know I promised we get into future predictions, but honestly, I think we're running a little bit late. Plus, I actually think the future predictions might be, and when I talk about future predictions, here's what I mean. it goes back and looking at a race and trying to analyze whether or not you're watching something that is purely a result of unique circumstances. Something like, Republicans picking up seat after 9/11 because the country was very unified around, fighting terrorism or Al-Qaeda, versus genuine seeds of like a political realignment. So we're going to save that because as soon as the election is over on Wednesday, we're going to come back here. We're going to
do an after-action review. That would be great. We're
going to post-mortem review and after-action review and figure out what happened. We get to either congratulate Christian on his wonderful predictions or mock him for getting everything wrong.
Yeah,
well, let's hope that it goes well.
Yeah. So anyways, listen, thank you. So there you go. You have your predictions. You've heard it here. I don't know if it was first, but you've heard it best here. Anyways, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you for our post-election coverage in our next episode. And once again, have a great day. And don't forget to vote.